Hello guys, welcome back to Story Time with Rob. Thank you everybody for listening to the last episode, and for, if you have, listening to all the ones prior to that as well. For those of you who let me know, well, first I'll say bye. If you happen to download last week's episode and had some problems with the audio, I apologize. I had to go back and we talked about it in the main episode, but I had to go back, find it, redo a couple things, and without getting into all the technicalities of it, I had to fix it. So we shouldn't have that problem this week. We do have a new story, and this one may or may not work. I'm going to find out as I'm recording it. I've read it, and it seems to be pretty good, but we'll see. I haven't read any of the following stories to it, so we're all gonna kind of get into it together. So hope you like it. And this is the story of how we made up a ghost, and now it's killing us. I just got off the phone. One of the Stonebrook 6, one of my best friends in the world, was killed last night. His husband Anthony called me, voice raw with fatigue and emotion. He said that the police didn't know the details of what had happened yet, but last night Ellis's remains were found in the parking garage of the building where he works. Where he worked. They told Anthony that they would have thought it was an explosion, but there were no signs of any fire or damage to anything other than Ellis himself. They would have said it was an obvious murder, but they don't know how someone could crush and dismember a human being that thoroughly without any heavy machinery, much less spread him across the 12-foot ceiling of floor 3B in that monolithic parking structure like a thick layer of chunky peanut butter. Anthony was crying again by that point, so I assume I had just heard him wrong. Then he repeated it, his voice coming in hitching gasps. A co-worker had come out just a few minutes after Ellis to find my friend dripping and plopping back onto the relatively clean concrete below where he had just been pressed into the ceiling. Anthony said that the only way they even knew it was him initially was due to the security footage of him going out towards his car. The video cut out as he approached the area, and when it returned, the timestamp showed 30 seconds had passed without footage. The girl who found him was out less than 5 minutes later, and no one else had entered or left the garage in that time so far as they could tell. Crushed personal effects and initial blood work confirmed it was him. I could feel myself teetering between arguing with Anthony that he must be wrong and breaking into tears myself. I had just seen Ellis 2 days ago when we were all together mourning the first of our circle of friends to die. Those of us that were flying out to Chicago had ridden together to the airport, and after Mills had caught her flight back to Austin, me and Ellis had just hung out at the airport restaurant until my flight came up. Our mood had been sad because of Cassidy's funeral and everything that followed, but we were trying to make the most of the time we had left. Ellis was telling me about his wedding and showing me pictures. I still felt guilty for not making it in person, but I had just started my new job at the time. Ellis, like always, understood and worked to make me feel better about it. I told him some about the girl that I'd been dating. The relationship was still improving after 6 months, which was a record for me. Ellis said that very thing, but then quirked an eyebrow at me. He asked if I had realized how I was looking at Mills the past couple days, and I tried to play it off like he was joking, but I knew he wasn't. In that subtle way he was trying to nudge me to consider if I was still in love with Millicent like I had been when we were growing up. But my head was too full already from everything else, so I pushed the question away, gave him a hug, and headed to my flight. That was the last time I talked to Ellis before something tore him apart. I hung up with Anthony after an hour, my throat raw and feeling of exhaustion weighing down on my every step as I went to the bedroom and collapsed onto the bed. I wanted to cry, but couldn't, as though the engine of my heart was too busy burning through gallons of fear and guilt to allow even a drop of sadness into its chambers. I tried to sleep, but after a while I gave up on that as well and began to write this account. I need to get it all out and away from me. Now, I realize that I've jumped in the middle of this rather than at the start. I'm tired and I'm not thinking straight. Let me provide a bit of background and then I'll talk about Cassidy's funeral and everything that happened after it. I had 4 best friends growing up. Ellis Macquarie, Millicent Davis, Thomas Wall, and Cassidy Friel. I think we were unique among many groups of childhood friends in that we had all come together at the same time, Mrs. Weber's 3rd grade classroom, and we were all equally close to each other. Aside from occasional childish arguments, we never fought with each other, and as we got older, we somehow managed to safely navigate the choppy hormonal seas of 2 pairs of hetero guys and girls, and a 3rd guy that was gravitating towards bi-curiosity. This is important because as I start to question my memories about so many things, I keep returning to my idea of friendships with the people closest to me. Ellis, who was always the kindest to us, Mills, who was the smartest and kept the rest of us out of trouble on several occasions, Thomas, who was always so moody around others but so light and happy when it was just the 5 of us, and Cassidy, who was shy and sweet and I now think died terrified. I don't have any close family left. My father died when I was 15 and my mother doesn't like talking to me anymore. My old friends fall into 2 categories. College friends that I rarely keep in touch with beyond social media, and my best friends from my days at Stonebrook. It sounds strange because we didn't meet at Stonebrook, which was our middle and high school before it was closed. We had spent 3 years together at Jackson Elementary across town, and we were just close then as we were later, but it was almost like our group identity wasn't fully cemented until we got to Stonebrook. 5th grade rumor was that the place had been a small college 50 years earlier, and I do think that was true. It was certainly an old building, and the shape and layout of the rooms retained faint traces of its earlier life. The building was shaped roughly like a hash mark, with 2 long, wide corridors intersected perpendicularly by 2 other long, wide corridors. The center square of those crisscross lines was filled by a small gymnasium that actually had a pool underneath its motorized floor, though the floor was kept locked and the pool had supposedly long been drained dry. But the age and uniqueness of the school, its quiet sense of history and mild creepiness, it had an effect on us. We stuck together even more than usual, making few outside friends. We worked to get into the same classes, and a few times when one of us was by ourselves, the wait until the bell rang was interminable. It was during one of these isolated classes when I first thought about the school being haunted, and even now, having talked about everything this past weekend with the others, that's still one of my few clear memories of our time at Stonebrook. Some small idea, an idle daydream, a simple what if. What if the school was haunted by a ghost? I got the news about Cassidy's death last Wednesday. It was Thomas that called me, just as he had called the others. After I had moved away at 15, after Stonebrook closed, the group had drifted apart. Thomas and Cassidy had stayed the closest, and sophomore year of college they'd gotten married. In the 10 years since, they had generally seemed happy the few times we talked or got together, but I knew they had their ups and downs. Thomas told me on the phone that they had been legally separated for the past 3 months, but were trying to work things out for themselves and their little girl. And then Cassidy had gone missing one morning and was found 5 hours later in the groundskeeper's shed of the park across the street from their apartment. The police were investigating it as a potential homicide due to the strangeness of the death, but there were no leads. Thomas had been on duty at the hospital where he worked as a physician's assistant, so his alibi was solid. Worse was that she seemed to have been drowned, despite being in a dry room with no clues as to how she got there. I couldn't get into Chicago until the morning of the funeral, but afterwards we all went back to Thomas's house. They had been living together during the separation, and as the four of us sat down around his living room, I found myself looking out the window at the park across the street, wondering where the shed was where my friend had been found. We'd been talking about Cassidy for the last 3 hours, telling funny stories and listening to Thomas go on emotional monologues about how much he loved her and how he had failed her, which was always followed by us reassuring him that she had loved him too and that none of this was his fault. He would always glance at me at this point, and I would try to give him a comforting smile and hoping it was enough because I didn't know what else to say. But as the evening wore on, you could feel the conversational momentum grinding to a halt. It was just past 8, but our tiredness and sadness were palpable. Still, I looked at Thomas, and I knew that his daughter was staying at his parents' house overnight, and I hated the thought of him being alone. So at the next lull, I suggested some, or all of us, spend the night with him. He looked like he was going to argue, but then he nodded with a weary look in his eyes. Yeah, I think I'd like that. For any of you that want to, though I know some of you have rooms already paid for. Millicent grinned.
My hotel looked like shit anyways.
Ellis murmured agreement, and I felt a slight buoyancy that I had found a small way to help. That's when I ruined everything. The Stonebrook Six are back together again. As soon as I said the words, I regretted them. I had meant it as a joking, overly dramatic, and silly proclamation to get a cheap laugh out of the others, but as soon as I said it, I realized that Cassidy was barely in the ground and I was talking about us being all together. Thomas glared at me while Mills stared, shaking her head, her eyes wide.
Why would you say that?
Ellis's tone was more hurt than accusatory.
Why the fuck would you say that, Alex?
I felt like I could hardly breathe, my eyes roving between the three of them. Fuck. I'm so sorry. That was stupid. I'm just not used to Cassidy being gone. And Thomas stood up, his expression hard.
This isn't about Cassidy. Why would you call us the Stonebrook Six again? Is this some kind of fucking joke to you?
Mills was on her feet now, putting herself between me and him.
Tom, chill out. He doesn't remember. You know that.
Thomas glanced down at her, his face reddening.
Then how the fuck does he remember the Stonebrook Six?
I was growing more confused and alarmed by the second. What? That's what we called ourselves. I remember we called ourselves that. The Stonebrook Six. It was a joke. Ellis had stood up now too, moving closer to me.
Okay, Alex, that's right, sorta. But do you remember why it was a joke?
I could feel tears stinging my eyes now. I didn't understand why everyone was so mad at me, especially if they weren't mad about me saying it with Cassidy gone. It was because there were only 5 of us. We were talking about nicknames one day and about how our group should have one as a joke. We talked about calling ourselves the Stonebrook 5 for some reason, but ended up all agreeing that the Stonebrook 6 sounded cooler, like an old outlaw gang. So we called ourselves the Stonebrook 6 even though there were only 5 of us. Thomas took a step closer.
Bullshit. Such bullshit. You know, I've never fully believed you're convenient. I don't remember shit. But how the fuck are you pulling out shit like that and not remembering what it really was?
Mills gave him a shove that didn't move him, but got his attention.
Fucking back off of him. He's not lying. He's lost more than we did, so try to remember that.
Mills' glare melted away as she turned back to look at me.
Alex, it's not like you think. A lot happened, and, well, you blocked out most of the bad, I think. We don't understand how or why you don't remember, but you need to know that we believe you and love you.
Thomas snorted.
Typical. Alex makes Cassidy's funeral day about him.
Ellis shot him a dark look.
Button it. We all loved Cassidy. You don't have the market cornered on missing her.
Looking back down, he gave me a sad smile.
Alex, what you were saying about how we started calling ourselves the Stonebrook Six, that never happened. We started calling ourselves the Stonebrook Six because of the professor.
I felt a rush of fear run through my body at that name. My mouth went dry and I shot up like the room was on fire. No. What? No. Mills looked at Ellis.
You shouldn't have said anything. You should have left it alone.
Ellis shrugged.
I didn't bring it up, but he has the right to know. Alex, do you remember the professor?
I shook my head violently and started to move past him out of the room. No, I don't want to talk about this. Thomas caught me in a strong grip and pulled me back into a bear hug that was equal parts angry and loving.
We're gonna talk about it, bro. I think it's time.
Mills was yelling at him, but he went on.
The professor was the sixth in the Stonebrook Six. It was the...
I shoved him hard enough that he lost his grip and went staggering back into a low coffee table, his arms pinwheeling as he tried to regain his balance before sitting down hard enough on the small table that one of the legs gave way and sent him sprawling onto the floor. For my part, I imagined I looked like a trapped animal. But that was okay, because that's exactly what I felt like. Mills had her hand raised as she stepped forward and touched my cheeks.
Sweetie, it's okay. We should probably go ahead and talk a little about it now, just so you're not confused anymore. Is that okay?
I still wanted to run, but her cool, smooth hands on my face were like soothing balm. I nodded reluctantly, looking down at Thomas. Are you okay, man? He stood up slowly and gave me a slight smile.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was being an asshole. Are we cool?
I nodded. Sure, man. I'll replace the table. I'm just really freaked out at the moment. Mills stepped back and nodded.
I know. So let's try talking it out. And if you reach a point that you get too scared, we'll stop, okay?
Okay. I paused and then pushed on, my eyes going between Millicent and Ellis. So who was the professor? Ellis is the one who answered.
It was the ghost. The one we made up. The one that hurt all those people.
What follows is my best recollection of what Ellis told me that night. I want to be clear, before I start, that I didn't truly remember anything more or different than what I told them or what I'd previously written. And it wasn't like I just had a giant blank spot from the age of 10 to 15 or 20. I have memories, plenty of memories of both my time at Stonebrook and what came after. It's just, now I believe that I'm missing a great many things, and that at least a few things I do remember actually never happened. That's the best and only explanation I have for my relative ignorance of our collective past. It scares, at least in part, because I now know that I've had one or more conversation with the rest of the six, with my friends, about me not remembering things at all or correctly. This was before they realized how deep-seated my block was and gave up trying out of some sort of combination of frustration and fear that forcing me to remember would do me harm. So not only do I not remember the events themselves, I don't remember them trying to remind me of them. It makes me feel that my memory lapses go beyond shock or trauma, more like someone or something intentionally fucked with my head. Even now, going over what I'm about to relay in this writing, I don't remember it, at least not well. It's like I saw a movie of a portion of my life and now have trouble distinguishing what I actually remember from my life and what I'm just remembering from the movie. When I finish writing this, I'm going to call Mills and see if she's okay. Again, below is my best recollection of one of the last times I got to talk to one of my best friends.
Alex, I know you say you don't know what we're talking about, and we believe you. We do. But stuff like you mentioning the Stonebrook 6, your reaction when I mentioned the professor, I think you still have those memories in there somewhere and have just blocked them out somehow. Or maybe they're being kept from you. Either way, I think it would be good for you, for all of us, if we explained a bit and see if it'll stick this time. See if you're ready. Now, as you know, we all transferred from Jackson Elementary to Stonebrook Middle at the start of 5th grade. The building was weird and kind of spooky, and we all mainly hung out with each other. Between classes, we started out meeting up at the big oak tree that stood at the edge of the bus drop-off parking lot. But by 7th grade, we were changing classes as much as high school and started running into older kids that were pissed that we were crowding their secret smoking spot behind the tree. We looked for another good hangout spot for a couple weeks, but then Thomas and Cassidy found us a way into the lower rooms. You look a bit lost, so let me explain. The hallways of the school crisscrossed, with vertical 4 walls being used for 5th through 8th grade, as well as special classrooms for things like music and clubs. The horizontal walls were used for 9th through 12th grade, and had the administrative offices and teacher's lounge. But as we figured out over time, each of those halls had another floor below it that wasn't connected to each other like the floors above. It gave each floor its own private basement, and while the rooms had been used for classes at some point in the building's past, by the time we got there, they were mainly for storage or for a secret hangout if you could find the unlocked door. The door to the basement of the 6th graders' hall didn't lock securely, and by the time of October of our 7th grade year had rolled around, we were already hanging out down there regularly. It wasn't as bad as it sounds. There was electricity, and the space was surprisingly clean, though there was a certain air of decay and disuse that always hung in the stale air. It was a spooky place, and the few times I was the first one to arrive, I had to fight the urge to go back upstairs until one of you got there. I think maybe that's what got us talking about ghosts.
No, I interjected. I remember daydreaming in class about there being a ghost at school. I was by myself and bored. I think I brought it up to the rest of you. Ellis frowned, glancing at Mills and Thomas.
Well, that could be right. Either way, it doesn't matter who brought it up first. We were all talking about it, and we were all a part of what came next. At first, it was just us swapping rumors and speculations we had heard about the school as a way to pass time during breaks or lunch. Truth be told, most of it was fairly tame. It seemed the place had been a college at some point, but nothing had ever happened there that we could tell. No grisly murders or dark rituals, no crazy people or monsters. Of course, mundane facts didn't satisfy us for long. We would talk about the school being creepy, and maybe having seen something or heard something one time. There would be passionate debates about how a place that old and creepy must be haunted by at least one ghost, despite the lack of any evidence to support it. Then we turned to talking about what such a ghost would be like. Cassidy's the one that came up with the idea that it was probably the dead soul of a former college professor. The professor, she suggested, had probably fallen in love with one of his students, and when his advances were rejected, he had killed himself at the school, possibly in the very room we sat huddled in between 4th and 5th period. It was just a story, of course, and we all knew it, but stories have power. So does belief. I've been thinking about that a lot the past few days, and I think stories are living things. Whether you're telling the tale or hearing it, you feed it with emotion and thought, with imagination and belief, and it evolves and grows. In time, a story can take on a life of its own. Over the next few weeks, we added a great deal to the professor. It became a kind of informal story contest where we would all take turns creating stories that either plumbed some chamber of the ghost or school's past, or reported on some more recent indication of the professor's continued presence at the school. Thomas was the first.
Thomas told us more details about how the professor was seen lurking around the halls of the college in the months. The girl he had been in love with had dropped out after his suicide, but returned the following quarter. She was one of the few women, and this combined with her prior absence caused her to redouble her efforts to catch up and surpass her peers. One night when she went to leave the school library, she found that she was locked in and all alone. Well, except for the professor. The next morning they found her bruised and bloody in a gibbering heap. She never returned to school, and people say she just died a few weeks later of some Mills added in how the building was actually built on the tribal ground of the Arikara, a Native American tribe that once lived in the area, or to be more accurate, she had added with dramatic flair, a banished offshoot of the Arikara had been shunned by the tribe for their extreme cruelty and dark magic practices. They had used the location as a site for their black rituals, and when they were driven from the land, European immigrants found themselves drawn to the place as well. A village had grown up in the spot in the early 1800s, being a prosperous trade hub for local farmers and distant merchants for nearly 50 years. Then, during the height of the Civil War, a small band of travelers had come to town to find every man, woman, and child slaughtered. The initial reaction were to blame a rogue of detached Confederate or Union soldiers, but closer examination showed that the townsfolk appeared to have turned on one another until the last one died of the wounds she inflicted on herself. It was another 30 years before anyone dared to build in that area again. But people have a short memory when it comes to money being made, and by the 1900s the current town had started growing in that direction, and soon the school was being built. Some say the same dark forces that plagued earlier generations caused the professor to commit suicide, and may still stalk these halls today. Ellis's tale. When they bought the closed-down college and started renovating it into the middle and high school, they found all these weird lower-floor hallways. Apparently they had been used for classes at one time, all except the one that we were meeting in. That one had been a lab the college had set aside for faculty to use, though only a couple ever did. One of those was named Arthur Chester, a chemist that was known for his obsessive devotion to his research and isolated lifestyle. When the school closed, everything was very chaotic, but they did try to make sure that everyone was out before they sealed everything up. They went into every underground chamber, calling out for people and checking for signs that someone was left behind. But Arthur had taken to testing his compounds on himself and laid passed out in a dim corner of a back room. He never stirred, and they sealed him in with no idea at all. When he awoke, it was another 2 days before he even knew he couldn't leave, and the theory was that he suffocated himself with gases from a concoction intended to blow the door off its hinges. All that's known for certain is that his face and hands were torn and broken from where he had frantically flung himself against the heavy metal door until his lungs or heart finally gave out. Cassidy's tale. A few years back, before we were at Stonebrook, one of the freshmen saw something moving in the woods near the school. They thought it was a deer at first, and they pointed it out to a friend, but the friend didn't see anything. Intrigued and wanting to prove their friend wrong, they tried to get their companion to go with him to the wood's edge, but they refused. Determined now, they set off by themselves while their friends went off to class yelling a stern admonition that the teacher was going to skin them alive for missing class. When the freshman didn't come home at night, everyone began to search for her. It wasn't long before they zeroed in on her friend and what she might have seen. This led them to the woods, and while they had brought 10 people and a pair of dogs to search for her, it wasn't necessary. She was hanging 30 feet up in the branches of a large tree not far in and along the main trail through the woods. Her skin had been flayed away and spread like ragged wings behind her, and her lipless mouth was held open by what they first took to be one of her own notebooks. However, on closer inspection, they saw that it was actually an old essay blue book. Written on the inside cover was the name of the girl the professor had loved.
These stories were told and retold over the course of several weeks, and every time that it would come to your turn, Alex, you would pass, saying you were still working on yours. We didn't push you, but we were starting to get tired of just rehashing the same old material, and for whatever reason, we didn't feel like we could move on to new stories or something else entirely until you were finished. So we started telling the stories to others. I think we were all doing it on our own at first. I remember the first time I talked about it to any of you and how I had told a couple of buddies in gym class about the professor. I was surprised to find you'd been doing the same thing. Stuff like that isn't uncommon, of course. Every school or town or group of more than 5 people have rumors and superstitions. Most of the time they have their time in the limelight and then fade away. Some stick around long enough to become urban legends or folktales. But when we started telling people about the professor, it spread quicker and more powerfully than any of us had expected. Part of it is that we were all telling it like it was true. We had taken to telling each other stories among ourselves, you included, so we were all practiced at telling details of the story without stumbling or lacking confidence. Another thing was that even though we were all known to be friends, we were all telling different people who then spread it to others. And within a month, our version of the professor's stories had been told probably 50 times. And that's not even counting the mutated versions, the spin-offs, the rip-offs, and the straight-up new stories other people were creating out of some kind of strange drive, whether it was just an urge to be a part of the current trend or something darker pushing them to do it. And by Christmas, people were telling each other to watch out for the professor and don't go in the woods alone during the holidays. We thought it was hilarious and were more than a little proud that we'd inadvertently created a school spirit, at least for a while. We'd kind of figured out that it would die back down when we came back in January. But that was before Jenna Hastings went missing.
Cliffhanger. Sorry about that. I'm getting used to leaving these off at a cliffhanger. I think it makes it a little bit better. This is kind of a short episode. I might do these ones a little bit shorter just so I can leave you wanting a little bit more for the next one. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this. And I'll see you next time. Love you.